From the air, Kiribati barely seems possible. 32 low-lying atolls, together with the raised island of Banaba, are scattered across an enormous stretch of the Pacific. Put all of Kiribati's land together, and you get only about 811 square kilometers. But the ocean around these islands covers roughly 3.5 million square kilometers. Here, a road can run with water visible on both sides. A boat can matter more than a car. A tide can decide when you leave home, when you fish, and when you return. And a country with relatively little land can still control access to one of the most valuable fishing regions on Earth. The name Kiribati is written in a way that can confuse outsiders. In the local language, it sounds closer to Kiribati. More than 130,000 people call this country home. And for them, the Pacific is not a view beyond the shoreline. To understand Kiribati, you have to start with the ocean. Because here, the sea is part of almost every decision. South Tarawa is the country's political and economic center. Government institutions, schools, hospitals, businesses, and many jobs are concentrated here. Today, around half of the country's population lives in the capital area. The problem becomes obvious when you look at the land beneath them. There isn't much of it. South Tarawa is a long, narrow chain of coral islands. Space is limited, and that turns ordinary urban problems into much harder ones. Where do you build when there is almost no room left? Where does waste go when there is no distant landfill over the horizon? And where does fresh water come from when salt water surrounds you? On coral atolls, fresh water can collect underground in a thin layer known as a freshwater lens. And saltwater intrusion can make an already limited supply even harder to use. It creates one of Kiribati's strangest realities. You can live with the Pacific just meters from your home and still worry about having enough safe water to drink. But leave crowded South Tarawa, and the country begins to feel very different. On many outer islands, daily life still follows the movement of the sea. People prepare boats while the air is cooler. And before heading toward the reef or lagoon, people pay attention to the water. At high tide, a passage that was difficult hours earlier may become usable. At low tide, reef areas that were hidden beneath the sea appear. These changes influence fishing, transport, and the rhythm of the day. For generations, local food has come from the ocean and the land. And copra, made from dried coconut flesh, remains an important source of income for many households. But the food eaten in Kiribati today also shows how much the country has changed. Recent household research found that almost every household was involved in some form of agriculture, fishing, livestock raising, or copra production. At the same time, imported food has become deeply important. Rice and sugar alone provide a large share of dietary energy, and close to half of household spending goes toward food. So despite being surrounded by one of the world's greatest oceans, Kiribati depends heavily on ships arriving from elsewhere. Distance has a price. And when shipping costs rise or supply chains are disrupted, that distance reaches all the way to the family table. There is another place where much of community life comes together: the Banaba. Usually open-sided and built for people to gather, the Banaba is more than a meeting hall. It is a place for discussion. And the simple act of being together. Its importance is evident even in the country's modern political system. Kiribati's national parliament is called the Banaba ni Mangatabu. The traditional gathering place and the modern state are connected even in the name. But culture here is not something locked safely in the past. Young people grow up with phones, social media, overseas education, imported entertainment, and opportunities far beyond their home islands. Some traditional skills and knowledge have weakened over time, and cultural institutions have worked to document and preserve them. That creates a question faced by communities all over the Pacific. When people move, technology changes and new opportunities arrive. What stays? And what gets carried forward? In Kiribati, distance has helped preserve distinct traditions, but distance has never kept the outside world completely away. Far to the east lies Kiribati. It has more land than any other coral atoll in the world. Its lagoons, reefs, salt flats, and long stretches of low terrain feel far removed from South Tarawa. And for years, that distance created a strange problem. Kiribati was so widely scattered that different parts of the country could operate on different calendar days. Government offices in one part of the nation might be working on Monday, while islands farther east were still living through Sunday. For a country trying to function as one state, that was more than a curiosity. It was inconvenient. So at the end of 1994, Kiribati changed the date arrangement used by its eastern islands. The international date line is not a fixed international border controlled by a single world authority. On maps, It bends around countries and territories to accommodate their chosen dates. After Kiribati's change, the entire country could share the same calendar day. Today, the Line Islands use UTC-14. That makes places such as Kiribati among the first inhabited places on Earth to enter a new date. It sounds like a piece of trivia. But here, geography had become so extreme that even the calendar had to adjust. Kiribati's isolation has never made it invisible to the rest of the world. On Betio, at the western end of South Tarawa, reminders of that are still standing. Concrete bunkers remain near modern neighborhoods. Military wreckage and memorials sit within a landscape where people now go to school, work, fish, and raise families. In November 1943, this small island became the center of the Battle of Tarawa. Japanese forces had turned Betio into a heavily fortified position. When American forces arrived, the surrounding reef became part of the battle. Many landing craft could not simply move straight across it. Men were left exposed as they tried to reach the island under fire. The fighting was short, but devastating. From the perspective of military planners, Tarawa was part of a much larger Pacific campaign. But maps can make war look cleaner than it is. For people living on these islands, the war came home. Foreign forces occupied their land. Communities were displaced and disrupted. Places used for ordinary life became military positions and battlefields. 80 years later, the concrete is still here. Not hidden in a museum. Right beside the living country that grew around it. And war was not the only outside force that permanently changed these islands. For that story, you have to travel to Banaba. Banaba does not look like most of Kiribati. Instead of being a low atoll, it is a raised coral island. And beneath its surface was phosphate. At the beginning of the 20th century, phosphate became enormously valuable because it could be used to make fertilizer. Mining began on Banaba around 1900. Over the following decades, British, Australian, and New Zealand interests extracted phosphate from the island on a massive scale. The material left Banaba and helped fertilize farmland overseas. The cost stayed behind. Strip mining tore through much of the island's surface. Land that had supported a community for generations was radically altered. Then came the Second World War and Japanese occupation. When the war ended, most Banabans did not simply return home and rebuild. In 1945, colonial authorities relocated most of the community to Rabi Island in Fiji. Phosphate mining on Banaba later resumed. It continued until 1979. So when we look at Banaba today, the damage is not an abstract environmental lesson. It is the result of decisions. Resources were taken from one small Pacific island to improve agricultural land in much larger countries thousands of kilometers away. And a community was left divided between its ancestral homeland and a new home in Fiji. Banaba remains part of Kiribati. Many Banabans live on Rabi. And Kiribati's parliament still includes an appointed representative for the Banaban community on Rabi Island. It is an extraordinary political arrangement born from an extraordinary history. Banaba also complicates the way Kiribati is often discussed today. The country's vulnerability did not begin when climate change became an international headline. Long before today's debate over rising seas, people here were already living with the consequences of decisions made far beyond their shores. And now, once again, a resource in Kiribati is valuable to the wider world. This time, it is moving through the ocean. Far offshore, tuna move through Kiribati's waters. These fish connect the country to a global industry worth billions of dollars. Kiribati can charge foreign fishing fleets for access to its waters, and that income is enormously important. In 2025, fishing license fees generated revenue equal to roughly 38% of the country's GDP. Think about what that means. The ocean not only feeds communities along the coast. Water hundreds of kilometers from the nearest home can affect the government's budget. The sea functions almost like a national infrastructure. But earning money from the ocean and protecting it can pull in different directions. The Phoenix Islands protected area covers more than 408,000 square kilometers. In 2010, it became Kiribati's first UNESCO World Heritage Site. For years, its large no-take protections made it one of the world's most remarkable examples of marine conservation. Kiribati later reopened the area to commercial fishing under a different management approach. UNESCO has continued to raise concerns about what weakened protection could mean for the site's ecological value. For Kiribati, this is not an easy debate between people who care about nature and people who do not. The same water can contain globally important ecosystems and resources a small island economy depends on. There is no clean line separating the environment from the economy. This is the part of Kiribati's story the outside world hears most often. Rising seas. Flooding. A country supposedly waiting to disappear. But that picture is too simple. An island does not need to vanish beneath the water for life to become harder. If salt reaches a freshwater source, that matters. If waves damage a road, that matters. If erosion moves closer to a house, that matters. If a family has to spend more time and money finding safe water, that matters. Climate pressure often arrives as a series of problems rather than one dramatic moment. And people here are not standing on the shoreline waiting for the end. Kiribati is adapting. One major part of that effort is Kiribati, a $110 million World Bank-supported infrastructure project approved in late 2024 is designed to improve climate-resilient air and road connections there. The larger goal is to make Kiribati a stronger economic center, giving people more opportunities outside the crowded capital. None of this makes the future easy. And speaking as though that place has already been lost, Kiribati has not disappeared. It is here. People are going to work. Children are going to school. Families are fishing, praying, arguing, celebrating, and making plans. Life is happening in the present. As evening settles over the islands, the same ocean appears everywhere. A boat crosses a lagoon. People gather beneath a Banaba. Traffic continues along the narrow road on South Tarawa. On Betio, wartime concrete stands beside modern homes. On Banaba, the broken landscape carries the marks of phosphate mining. And far to the east, Kiribati will enter tomorrow before most of the world. These places can look impossibly small on a map. It cannot show what it means to know the tides, because your family has watched them for generations. It cannot show the memory attached to land, or what happens when that land is mined. And it cannot decide what home means to the people who live there. More than 130,000 people live in Kiribati today. They are not characters in somebody else's climate warning. They are citizens of a country with its own language. The future here is uncertain. But uncertainty does not mean absence. For generations, the people of Kiribati have learned to live with distance, changing tides, war, extraction, isolation, and a world that keeps reaching these islands from far beyond the horizon. And whatever comes next, Kiribati cannot be understood by looking only at the narrow pieces of land visible above the water. You have to look at everything around them. Because in Kiribati, the ocean is not the background. It is the story.